Chris, good morning.
Good morning.
Looks beautiful where you are.
Thank you.
I don't think I said,
Thank
but
you.
if you can see out my window right there, that's what we're dealing with.
Oh,
We've got not a lot of snow, but maybe 6 to 8 inches of snow over here in Columbus, Ohio. So looks a
yeah.
lot nicer and warmer in Texas.
It is. We had a really bad cold snap for Texas, and there was the threat of snow, and even the threat of snow is enough to send most Texans into a panic.
Yeah, you guys are running on the
Yeah,
grocery stores, buying the water,
yeah, right,
buying the
buying
toilet
everything up.
paper. Yep.
Yeah, but it's actually, thankfully, it's never quite as bad as predicted. So we did have some pretty cold, freezing days. So it does get cold out here, but definitely nothing like what y'all are dealing up with in Ohio or what I dealt with growing up in Chicago. So
Yeah,
I'll
well,
take it.
I don't think I've ever had anyone, at least that I can remember, do the podcast outside. So that's a first, but it kind of ties into who you are and what you do. So, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit
Yes.
about yourself and what you've been up to over the last couple of years?
Oh, sure. So I am a wild game butcher, uh, operating out of the Texas Hill Country. I've been doing this for the past 8 years. Prior to that, I was a native Chicagoan. I was a professional photographer down there and found my way down to Texas to my family's ranch, uh, and was kind of looking for what to do next, man. Always been really involved in the culinary world in terms of I come from a line of chefs, spent a lot of time in the kitchen with my father, watching cooking shows, things like that. So I thought that was kind of a natural next step. The kind of photography I did up in Chicago was not available to me here out in rural Texas. And just kind of one thing led to another, and I ended up answering a random Craigslist ad that was looking for seasonal help for deer processing, uh, which I had no idea really what that meant. They
Hmm.
call it game, right? So I had no idea what game processing meant. To me, that was a video game. I was like, oh, I'm going to be testing video games. I don't like
Uh,
that's, it was a
right.
total city kid,
Game
right?
processing. Yeah. No,
Yeah, game
that makes
processing.
sense. Yeah, it made sense to me.
Uh, I was a total city kid, had never grown up hunting or really spending a lot of time outdoors. And so I had no concept really of what I was walking into. And really into my first day there, I landed in kind of the middle of deer season, which is a very stressful time to end up processing game.
Hmm.
And within my first like 10, 15 minutes there, I got the first knife and a deer leg and was kind of put to work. And up until that point, I had never butchered anything. Not a chicken, not a, like hadn't filleted fish. All my food was sourced from the grocery store.
I would say that's pretty
So,
much everybody in the United
yeah,
States has never really
yeah.
done any legit butchering. I would say like 99.99% of Americans have done no butchering.
Right. But I'm walking into a world where that is a life skill that a lot of people do have. But I was coming from a world where that life skill does not exist.
Hmm.
There's no exposure to it. Um, and it was very transformative for me. I quickly kind of fell in love with the idea of that I could not separate myself from the fact that I was turning this animal into food.
Mm.
Uh, from an artist's standpoint, I always looked at it as like I was working a sculpture, right? So
Mm.
the carcass is my piece of clay, my piece of stone, and my knife is I'm carving away at it, and the result is art, which is food, right? We talk about how food is art. That for me starts even before it gets to the plate. The butchery part is art for me. It's kind of
Mm.
the medium that I feel that I work in. Uh, and then it came with this facing where our food came from, right?
Mm.
Facing this idea of I didn't know beyond our grocery store where our food came from. And that those thoughts just kind of tumbled around in my head a lot for the first few years that I was learning how to butcher. really honing techniques and kind of outlining my own ethics around it, my own philosophies around it. I was confronted, I think, with a lot of internalized biases in terms of what hunting looks like, who
Mm,
hunters are, and what that whole world sort of represents as a whole. Um, and so I became very, very passionate about both educating people to where our meat comes from and kind of helping to rewrite the narrative of the role that hunting plays in our societies and who truly are the people that are out there hunting and why are they doing it. And so, so that's kind of a little bit of what I've been up to. 2020 hit, and at that time, everybody was worried about where their food was coming from.
well,
Nobody knew. There was grocery stores were drying up. There was this return to wanting to reconnect with the food. And I think that was an opportune time for me to settle into kind of building the educational bent of what I do. I'm a commercial processor, but I'm also an educator. And so I created Meet Your Me as a way of educating people like myself, my friends back in Chicago, who didn't have that connection about where our meat comes from, why it's important to honor the life that was taken in order to feed us, and uh, how there's growth in the discomfort of facing that reality.
mm, absolutely. You said that you come from a family of chefs. That's kind of something that runs through the generations. I think I read that your family's from El Salvador. You came to the United
Yes,
States when you were quite young.
yes.
What do you remember about that, and what did your mother bring with her from El Salvador in terms of that, like, cultural cooking experience?
So I don't remember anything of my life in El Salvador. We left when I was about a year old.
Mm,
So by the time I got to Chicago, I was two. I very much grew up, it's a Chicago native thing. I
yeah.
grew up a Midwestern girl. But inside my home, it was very much a Salvadorian immigrant household. The foods we ate, my father was the chef, so he did a lot of the cooking. The food we ate were traditional Salvadorian cuisines.
Mhm.
I so they brought a lot of that kind of like for I think the best example I can give people is that I always had a Thanksgiving meal, but I didn't never had a traditional Thanksgiving dinner until I was well into my 20s.
Mm,
Uh, our Thanksgiving meal was Salvadorian spices and Salvadorian side dishes. I had no idea about like cranberry sauce or
ah,
anything like that. But my parents really, they're entrepreneurs. So I'm really the daughter of two entrepreneurs.
mm,
They came to this country with nothing, not knowing the language, and they ended up owning their real estate brokerage that my sister then took over and grew into her own business. So I come from a family of entrepreneurs. We're always looking to see how we can take what we love and build a life with it. And so they got into real estate.
mm,
And what that did is it really exposed me to a lot of neighborhoods in Chicago. I was, kind of a latchkey kid, but I was always with them.
mm,
And so that would be going into different neighborhoods in Chicago, which Chicago is a huge culinary hub, right? There's food from all over the world, and it's all very authentic and it's all very good. And so my father and my mother and they would take me on these like culinary adventures. And we would go out to eat somewhere, and he would taste the food, and then he would go home and recreate it.
wow, that's cool.
Um, yeah, so I didn't really go back to El Salvador until I think I was about 11 to 12. And one of the biggest experiences there, I had always seen my parents kind of in the realm of being business people.
Mhm.
right? They were always like very career driven, goal oriented. I didn't really know them outside of that. And when we went to El Salvador and they were family and they were on vacation and they were a lot more relaxed, I remember that my mom said we were going to make chicken soup. And I was like, okay, cool, chicken soup. I love chicken soup. I love, uh, and she grabbed a chicken and she slaughtered it in front of me.
Mm.
And it was the first time I had ever seen that. I had not ever been exposed to that. I had no idea what was happening. I was like, she just killed this chicken. Like my brain didn't make the connection between the chicken from the grocery store and the chicken that my mom was preparing.
Not to mention, that's like a
Yeah.
whole other side of your mother that you probably didn't even know
Yeah.
existed. Like, "Wait a minute, this is my loving, nurturing mother. Like, this is a
She's
real
just like,
estate
yeah.
mogul," and just boom, cleaver down.
Yeah, and just like taking this animal out to feed us, and I didn't drink any of the chicken soup. I was so upset.
Yep, yep.
I think I didn't eat chicken for quite some time after that. But of course, eventually I returned to that, and but that I now seeing where I am, like that was a pretty defining moment of what I always try to think about when I'm talking about butchering or hunting to people is that little girl who had never been exposed and saw her mother do something that was, like you said, completely out of the character that she knew. And doing this like quote unquote violent act, but the end result is there was like this delicious family meal
Mhm,
that I missed out on,
mhm,
but that everybody in my family really enjoyed. And I still remember them talking about how good it was. And I just thought that was the grossest thing,
mhm,
but, time, experience, life, I was, 12 years old. I'm much older now. And now I hunt for my food. And for me, there is something different about eating meat specifically, or even from the garden, where I'm the only link, right, between where that food came from and where it ends up on my table.
mhm.
So it's quite a trajectory.
Yeah, while we're on that topic, and this is probably something that you talk about all the time, but can you maybe just touch on how you explain to people who I'm sure say this to you, this kind of cognitive dissonance, like, "Oh, no, I eat meat, but I just don't wanna kill it myself. I just don't wanna, like, be a part of that process." Because I talk to a lot of people who are like, "Oh, I could never
Okay.
kill an animal," and I'm like, "We just had, chicken shawarma, like, 3 hours ago. Like,
Yes.
you did that. You didn't do it, but you did it." How
Yes.
do you kind of think about that and talk about that where people will say things like that? Because I think most people on planet Earth eat meat. Something like 98+% of people eat meat. Don't
Right.
quote me on my stats, but a very, very high percentage of people on planet Earth eat meat. But a lot of
Right.
people don't want to do the killing. So how do you think about that?
Well, I think at the beginning of my journey, I was less compassionate about it than I am now. When I first started sort of Meet Your Meat, I was very unapologetic. It was, hey, if you eat meat, you need to really face this head on, understand what this animal is going through, and uh, I was not going to make apologies for graphic images or things like that. Remember, I was a photographer first, so especially like on social media, the audience was not an audience of hunters and outdoors people. They were artists and urban people, and so folks that were not exposed to that, but all that ate meat,
Mhm.
right? Um, I think as time has gone on, I feel I'm more compassionate about that, right? It's like, yeah, I understand that this idea that you don't want to kill or you can't kill an animal in order to eat meat, right? So nobody's asking you to do that, right? Nobody's saying that you have to go out and kill everything,
You lose
right?
your
Nobody,
privileges for meat unless you kill it. Right?
yeah,
Nobody's saying
right,
that. Yeah.
right, right. But what I'm asking is that you be a steward of the animals you eat. So if that means that you're eating, any sort of poultry or beef or anything, that you're advocating for the humane treatment of these animals, right? That you are being a steward of that. Does that mean that you buy things locally? Does that mean that you lobby your government? Whatever that looks like to you, that it's this idea that we have to be accountable and responsible for our role as consumers and understand that there's no such thing as like ethical consumption in our society. All
Mm,
our consumption requires death, even if you are a strict plant-based diet, in order to farm those crops. You're talking about monoculture, you're talking about ruining topsoil, you know, uh, insects, flora and fauna that gets eradicated by that. So I think that the moment we can accept that our lives depend on the death of other things,
mm,
then we become more empathetic to that. And so the idea is, okay, you don't have to go out and hunt, but understand that hunters are not outsourcing their death, right? That you are. Like, the death is going to happen.
mm-hmm,
And that hunters are conservationists, right? Like, there's all these deep conversations that we can go into about how hunting is conservation in terms of herd management. If you have overpopulation of deer, what does that mean for the health of the wildlife? What does that mean for the health of the folks that interact with the wildlife, the society that interacts with the wildlife? Hunters overall have a lower impact uh, because they're harvesting, they're killing 2, 3 deer a year at the most to feed their families. They're not contributing to like grocery store costs, things like that. They're taking directly from the land. Um, so it's more, I think that I invite these conversations, right? I think that it's just a matter of let's take a look at it from a different way. I'm not, it's an ask, right? It's like, let's talk about our role in the food that we eat.
mm-hmm,
I always like to say that we are what we eat. And if you don't know what you're eating, if you're not taking any sort of accountability for what you're consuming, then who do you truly know who you are? And I think consumption across the board, right? Like what you're consuming in terms of who you're listening to, who you're surrounding yourself, with, what kind of conversations are you having? All those things require your attention. And by that same token, what you eat requires your attention.
mm,
Not just like mindless consumption, but that thoughtfulness of not only did an animal lose its life in order for me to eat, but the human chain that brought that animal's death to the plate that to the meal that I'm enjoying. Those are fellow humans who are doing the hard labor in order for me to get to eat. Right? So even just like those thoughts of the chains of those people behind where your food comes from, all the way to where the animal who's lost his life, I think will breed more empathy that hopefully will bleed over into other people's parts of life, thinking about, what other kind of hard conversations can't I have, or if I'm humanizing a whole process,
mm.
essentially.
Yeah, and I think when I've spent time in, Latin American cultures and other cultures, food is like this thing that we all slow down, we're going to eat, just like you sort of explained, like the whole family's involved in this chicken soup process, and then we eat it and we all, spend time together. Whereas in America, it's like, okay, get the food, throw it down, get back to work, go on with our day, get out to your workout. I need this chicken to fuel my workout. It's very
Hmm.
like, well, where did that chicken come from? Came from the grocery store. Well, where does Costco get their chicken? It's like, I don't know. I don't have time to think about that. Um,
Right.
and I kind of, as you were speaking, wonder if there's a big health benefit maybe just internally, like not even I'm eating cleaner food, but just like you're kind of mentally and physically and almost maybe spiritually bringing that thing full circle. It's like I understand this whole process, and I have to imagine that it's a little more mentally and physically rewarding for you when you're like, I went out and I hunted this, I butchered it. Now I'm feeding myself and I'm feeding friends and family. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Do you feel like there's a health benefit to being a part of the whole process?
Oh, 100%. I think that being out in nature simply, the worst part of a hunt is the killing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's something that everyone focuses on, but for hunters, that's the most difficult part. The most transformative and beautiful part really is just being out in nature,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's this feeling of you can't be bothered, right? Like, so for instance, if you're going on a hunt, you're required to be quiet, right? Sit and observe. Like, if those things don't happen, there's your chance of success is zero. So in order to have any chance of success, you have to slow down, be quiet, and just look. And I think that those three things put our brains in a sort of space of meditation, like a space of reset. And so I think that just being out in nature for is a health benefit,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it doesn't have to be like I'm gonna go on this big hike or anything. It's just like let me just go sit and look and just be, right? This idea of just being, I think, is a big health benefit. One of the things that happened to me when I started hunting, it took me a long time to hunt. So I was a butcher for quite a long time before I even decided to start hunting. Um, because I was afraid of, like many people, I didn't think that I could kill an animal. I knew that I could take an animal and turn it into food and feel fulfilled and honored to be able to do that for other people. But I don't know that I thought that I could do that for myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I really wanted to explore what that might look like.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to have that experience because it became important to me to know where my meat came from, right? Like I really wanted to, over the years, I sort of established this ethos, my personal ethos of how I wanted to interact with my food. And one of the things was that I wanted to be as connected to the source of my food as possible. And for me, that meant that I needed to hunt. One of the reasons that I decided to stay in wild game. So, I have and can butcher domestics and things like that. But I specifically stayed in wild game because it is the closest to the source, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the hunter is doing all the labor and taking all that responsibility for the food that they put on their table. And that to me was very challenging. Um, and definitely something that pulled me out of my comfort zone. And I'm a curious person by nature, and I like to get pushed out of my comfort zone, no matter how much I resist it. So it spoke to me in a lot of ways. But when I decided to start hunting. I went on my first hunt, and that moment of killing an animal that I knew, like choosing really what animal, the whole process of getting set up, watching the animals, choosing an animal, taking that shot, was transformative in the sense of it felt like there was going to be a before and after this moment in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, means I don't think I ever felt as plugged into the human experience as I did when I pulled that trigger and I saw my animal go down.
Mm.
There, I felt filled with purpose. Um, and then I felt incredible sadness. You know, there's this idea that hunters are just looking to kill something, right? And there's no emotion attached to it. But as I said previously, the killing part is the worst part of the hunt, right? Taking a life is never easy, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. Um, and so the emotions of like grief and sadness and happiness and accomplishment, you know, and empowerment,
Mm.
they coexist in a way that no other experience in my life had given me that.
Mm.
You know, I had always lived a life where grief was kind of separate from joy. You know, intellectually, you know that they should coexist together. You know that they're the just different sides of the same coin of the human experience. But I think that for me, the first time I had that experience, um, was incredibly transformative. I was able to do this incredibly hard thing. And on the other side of doing this incredibly hard thing, I'm rewarded by food for my family. You know, so that sense of being able to overcome and being then rewarded by food for your family, that changed my whole life experience in terms of how I'm working through life now,
Mm.
right? Now it's like, what can't I overcome? Because I know that like once I overcome, on the other side of that is really going to be everything that I've been working for. I just
Mm.
got to like push through it, right? I didn't want to kill an animal. I never want to kill an animal, but I do want to be connected as much as I can to my food source. And I do want to know where my meat comes from.
Mm.
And so if those two things are of paramount importance to me, and the pathway to that is, well, you have to source your own meat, and that means that you have to go out and find it and kill it and butcher it. That's just what needs to happen in order for me to like walk the walk,
Mm.
right? So it's not necessarily something that I take joy in, but it is something that I take pride in. And it's never like the
Mm.
pride of the kill, it's the pride of I was able to overcome this thing, this
Mm.
hard thing. And on the other side of that, I'm able to feed my family. And what an accomplishment that is.
It's really interesting you say that. And I was kind of thinking as you were speaking, and I can't think of many other situations where, yes, you are like happy and proud and satisfied, but also sad and I don't want to say disappointed, like, but you're upset. You're both happy and sad. It's like grandma died, sad, but like she's in a better place and or she was in a lot of pain, like happy, but not many experiences in life kind of give you that you're like both happy and sad at the same time. I thought that was
Mhm.
really interesting what you said there and made me think about it.
Yeah, it's it's one of the things that I think was sort of unexpected, you
Mm.
know. And so what I'm trying to do with like my wild game butchery, and you know, I've got my quote unquote brand Meet Your Meat, which is sort of the educational arm of what I do, is to foster spaces and experiences where people can be safe, are safe to be uncomfortable,
Mm.
right? Like, and understand that if they do want to hunt, you know, here are the like ethical, humane ways, the best practices, right, towards that. And then when it does come to that moment where you are killing an animal, it's like whatever you feel is okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't have to pretend to be anything other than like vulnerable. You just allow that moment to teach you.
Mhm.
right? And it is a teachable moment. It is a matter of knowing. You get to know, I think, a lot more about what you're capable of, and again, like what you can overcome, and what that looks like for you, not just in hunting, but in other areas of your life. I'm
Mhm.
very fortunate. So I work with the Texas Wildlife Association here in Texas, and they have a program called the Adult Learn to Hunt program.
Mm.
And through that program, folks can apply to this hunting program, and we take hunters all over Texas onto these private ranches, and it's for a weekend, and we teach them A to Z what hunting is, right? So they learn how to sight in a rifle, they learn how to shoot a rifle, they learn how to track an animal, how to butcher their animal, how to cook their animal,
Mm.
and how to kill their animal. We have mentors, and I provide a lot of butchery education, and we have wild game chefs on deck. So these people are really receiving a whole education about hunting and all the things it brings to the table, all the things it brings up, in sort of a safe environment to feel like, okay, I can do this hard thing because I'm supported by others. And whether or not they continue on to that journey, whether or not they turn into like lifelong hunters or anything after that, that's really beside the point, right? The point is, here's this space that we're giving you to do this really hard, transformative, meaningful thing, to have this life experience, and then to hopefully take it with you to other aspects of your life.
Mm. Seems like that's a great program. That's by the
Yeah.
Texas government?
No, that's it's not.
It's okay.
It's a privately it's a nonprofit
I was gonna
in
say, man,
Texas.
Texas just
Yeah.
they really love their hunting. This is like a government-run program to teach.
Well, so there is the Texas Parks and Wildlife Association, or the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department does participate in, like, there's the Texas Youth Hunting Program. They help participate in that. They do work with the Texas Wildlife Association. Texas is 98% owned, privately owned.
That is
So
a
there's not a
unique
whole lot of,
feature of the state, correct?
yes, that is a unique feature of the state. There's not a whole lot of public land. And that can be tricky when you're talking about hunting and access to the outdoors and things like that. On the other hand, um, there is a lot of incentives from landowners to manage and to conserve their acreage, for the wildlife, right? So Texas is incredibly wild and beautiful for the most part because of private landowners who have taken the stewardship of Texas land in their own hand. And so you can say, yes, that there's a lack of public land, but there's really not, um, but there's other ways to gain access. The Texas Wildlife Association is one. Hunting is a business here in Texas. It is an industry. Um, I'm a commercial processor, so that's kind of my day job. I butcher wild game all year round. Whereas in other states, you have seasons. Texas does have a whitetail season, but we have a lot of high fence ranches, again, that are privately owned,
Mm.
that have exotics. Access deer are an invasive species that runs around in Texas as well. So Texas has a lot of game,
Mm.
and a lot of opportunities for folks to hunt in.
Yeah, and it just feels like the ethos of Texas is still to kind of stay wild. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
people in that area that are like, I'm a
Yeah.
hunter. I kind of rebel against the norm, if you will.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
whereas in Chicago, if you would say, "Hey, yeah, I hunt," they'd be like, "Whoa, you're crazy! Like, where do you even do that?" And I
But
do.
and so, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that's part of it is that we have all
Mm,
moved towards cities, right? Because there's better
right.
job opportunities. And that has in turn created more grocery stores because the grocery stores go, hey, well, hey, there's a business opportunity here. There's no one,
Right.
making their own food here in Chicago. So we bring in these grocery stores and there's profit to be had. But that takes us all farther away from the outdoors and farther away from wild game. So just like I live in Columbus, I live downtown Columbus. There's definitely hunting if I like you get 40 minutes or so outside of the city.
Hmm. Hmm.
But there's no hunting in Grandview, where I live. It's a nice little
Yeah.
community. Um,
Yeah.
so that has taken people farther away from the experience of being outside and being a hunter.
Yeah. And I don't think everyone needs to be a hunter. Just like, my husband doesn't hunt, but he gardens, right? So he's providing a lot of food in that way. I think for me, it's more important that we take a look at the food that we're consuming, right? And that we are being good stewards of the animals that we're eating. I'm a soft heart. I always say, like, I'm a soft heart in a tough world. And so for me, animal welfare is paramount. And that might sound a little bit strange coming from like a hunter and butcher if we're looking at a traditional narrative. But truth be told, that hunters, they know more and they love the animal they're hunting often more than the people that are advocating for them to not.
Hmm.
Um, and so for me, it's like whatever you choose your diet to be, however you consume your meat specifically, it's just an ask and an invitation to think about the life of the animal on the other side of that steak, right? Because that steak didn't come from something.
Hmm.
That steak was at one point a muscle and a living, breathing animal that lived a life, and it like what kind of quality of life did that animal eat? What was its life experience like?
Hmm.
And as a meat eater, I do firmly believe that we are responsible for that stewardship, that we should not, that if we cannot face that, then we need to take a look at the meat that we're consuming. I tell folks, if it comes to the point where it's just too hard to watch an animal be butchered, even though you know that you're going to eat it, then maybe rethink your relationship with meat. Again, not everyone needs to eat meat,
Hmm.
right? I'm not like here advocating for like everybody be carnivores and everybody be meat. I'm more advocating for the stewardship of the diet that you're eating, right?
Hmm.
With the thought to the fallout from it, the thought, the human labor behind it, and the thought of the animals that suffer for our consumption. And what are ways that we can, in our own communities, sort of limit the damage and the impact that we do.
Yeah, as you were speaking, I was thinking of this documentary. Maybe you've seen it by Steve Rinella, "Stars in the Sky," a hunting story.
Yeah. Hmm.
Well, there's this scene that I love where he's at like a book signing of some sort, and there's a guy who's like clearly like an activist of some sort or has like a differing opinion, which is totally fine. But he stands up and he says, don't you think that all of this is just kind of an excuse for you to, go out and kill an animal? And Steve goes, well, first, that wasn't really a question, but I'm going to answer it like it was a question. And he says, I care more about these deers than you ever will. He's like, I've spent more time with these animals. I know more about these animals. I know more about the species and the differences. I know more about their diet. I know more about their movement patterns than you ever will. So he's like, so for you to say that I don't care about the animal, he kind of flipped it around and said, like, without attacking the individual, he's like, prove to me that you care about the animal. Prove to me that you actually know something about this animal. And that kind of brings me to one of the questions that I have is I saw on your Instagram, you have this book, Shotgun Conservationalist, about how hunters have actually done a lot more for conserving animals than really any other body group of people. The PETA of the world, obviously, they're a controversial group, but they don't buy and hold land as far as I understand, which is a big part of the hunting ethos is like, hey, if we want to protect these animals, like we need to buy
Hmm.
land for them to go live on and stop like turning it into
Right.
developments. Obviously we have to have somewhere to live, but as you kind of just said in Texas, that's a huge part of it is that there are these like crazy million acre ranches with tens of thousands of deer on it, and those owners go, hey, we're not going to like turn this into, a commercial endeavor. We're going to like let these animals have space, and that is the big thing that keeps them going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that was a great scene. Yeah, and I've seen that movie. And it was one of the things that just kind of validated where my ethos aligns, right? It's very much the same. Um, I can tell you more about, a deer's diet. I can, like, one of the things that I loved about wild game is that you do get to learn the life of the animal and what a privilege it is. I always say that, like, if I find mesquite thorns, I know what part of Texas it came from, like
Mm,
even depending on it's, if it has fat on it, what kind of diet it was having. Like, there is an intimate connection that hunters have with the animals that they kill and they consume that folks that um, take the stance of hunting is barbaric and unnecessary often don't have.
mm,
There's just a huge disconnection from where we get our food to how we consume our food, and folks with that mindset, they're well intentioned. It's like, hey, like let's like, yeah, let's advocate, for animal welfare. Yeah, I'm behind that, right? But let's talk about like we have gotten rid of all predation in the United States. Humans are the predator,
mm-hmm.
right? If we were talking about having an equal society, right? There would be predators roaming around, but we don't want that because then we would be prey, right? So we have become the predator, the top apex predator. And with that comes responsibility. If you take a look at nature, the predator-prey relationship exists um, as a way of balancing life.
Mm-hmm.
If deer are not taken, killed, hunted, harvested, whatever adjective you want to use to describe what we're doing, you leads to an overpopulation of deer,
Well, deers will
right?
eventually starve to death, correct? Like there's just not enough
Yes,
resources.
yes, yes. So yeah, you're right. There's just not enough resource, and also, as deer age, their teeth get ground down to the point that they cannot consume anything. They can't take any nutrition in, so they starve to death,
I
right?
saw the
So that's
picture
their
on your Instagram of that grizzled veteran, that old deer. That him
yeah.
really exhausted.
That was a mercy, right? So you've got overpopulation leads to diseases, you know. Nature is much more cruel, right? Like there's this idea, Disney sold us this idea of that nature is this happy-go-lucky place, occasionally with like a villain, but the trees are all happy and the birds are all dancing and everybody's getting along. It's like, no, nature has no morality. Nature is there to balance itself,
Mm,
right? And hunters are part of helping that balance.
mm,
If we outlawed hunting, we would have sick wildlife. We would have wildlife that would go extinct because another one would, take over all their food. So there'd be all these different negative outcomes that people don't think about,
mm-hmm.
right? And so it's like to that point, it's like, yeah, let's all be advocates for it. Absolutely, but let's also understand that there's space for different types of stewardship, right? And hunters, as you said, hunters are conservationists. One of the reasons I love that book, and my friend Brant McDuff wrote it out of New York, a great advocate for the outdoors, and it's called Why Environmentalists Should Love Hunting, right? So it's a book geared towards folks who like that gentleman at the Steve in that scene,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's geared towards folks who kind of take that viewpoint and it demonstrates to them, okay, well, here is how hunting has contributed fiscally, right? And here is how hunting has contributed to the health of wildlife. It's not telling you that, hunting is the be and end all. but it is allowing you to see as hunting is a tool of conservation, right? Like hunting is stewardship of the land. It is stewardship of the wildlife. Um, and and the other thing that like for me is that I know that I don't look like what people expect a wild game butcher to look like or what a hunter looks like. And so for me, that's also important, right? To show folks that what they think they know is not always what they know, right? That also translates to other parts of our lives. It's like if you stay in the state of like, I know what I know and that's it, that bubble, um, and you don't ever wander outside of that to like what could be, you miss out on a lot of like possibilities in your life, right? But for me, it's like I'm here to also show people it's like you can occupy space and wherever your passion or wherever your purpose feels, um, without having to like conform uh or feel unwelcome
Mm.
in that space.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is a misperception that you talked about is the Disneyification of nature. Um, like animals don't generally die of old age. Like they don't die.
Yeah.
Like they are taken out by predators. I mean, there are predators
Mhm.
that would love to have a slow, deer or a deer with a broken leg or a deer like the one that you had a picture of with one eye that
Yeah.
they're like, "Oh, this is like going to be easy for us." Whether it's wolves or coyotes or it's mountain lions or even just various different ways that diseases and sicknesses can attack these animals. These animals are going to die, and
Yeah.
a gun is not the worst way that an animal can go out. And I'm sure you know far more about this than I do because I'm sure you've came across animals carcasses that have had all sorts of carnivorous predators on them.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's humane and ethical hunting is comes from a place of wanting to honor the animal, right? Like hunters, for the most part, aren't looking to like make anything suffer, right? They're just looking to put food in the freezer just to feed their families, just to know where the food comes from, just
Hmm.
to foster that connection. I think that whatever you do in life, if you can find a place where you feel connected to purpose, and connected to the human experience, that's what you should foster. And, for me and for other hunters, that's where we feel purpose and connection. For me, being a butcher, a wild game butcher, and working with hunters, uh, fills me with purpose and connection. And so that's the way that I foster my stewardship. That's the way that I feel that I'm best a conservationist. That's the way that I feel the best version of myself.
So you talked about your first hunt a little bit and how you sort of got started. How do you recommend other people like begin their hunting experience? I've heard different ideas on this, but I'm interested to hear yours.
Sure. I'll tell you. So my hunting experience started with me going to is what they're called on-site processors. So there is this meat market that has like live lambs and goats and things like that. 'Cause before I even pulled the trigger, I wanted to know what it felt like to be responsible for an animal's death, right? Like to be there in that moment and see it.
So when you say a
So
live animal processor, the animal is there, it's alive, and you say, "Okay, I want this
yes,
goat," and they'll butcher it right
yes,
there,
yes,
like right in front of you.
yes,
That's kind of intense.
yes, yes. Yeah. I'm not saying that that's like the most recommended way to
That
start out,
might
but that's
actually
kind of
totally go the opposite direction. You watch that, you're like, "Yep, don't want to be a part of that anymore."
yeah. Well, you're right, and so then that's that conversation, right? That you have to kind of have with yourself. Um, so I went and I picked out a lamb, and they did a halal slaughter, so they slit the throat and bled it out, and
Mm.
I followed it to the kill floor, and I followed it through the butchery, and it was. It was difficult, definitely, to be so present for that experience. It definitely gave me flashbacks to my mom and the chicken.
Mhm.
Um, but I really wanted to sort of walk the walk, right? Like if this is the principles that I've decided that I'm going to live my life by, then these are the steps that I want to take. Um, so for folks that are looking to start out hunting, I think probably one of the best ways is to see if they have any sort of learn to hunt programs in their state, either funded by the government or funded by a conservation um, advocacy place,
Mhm.
that may have connections like that. It's that is one of the gaps I think that happens with hunting. Every place that even public land hunting, Texas hunting doesn't really matter is having access and mentorship. It's typically like you have to know someone who knows someone, or be lucky. There's no like place that you can go and you sign up and you get taken on a hunt. And that's one of the reasons that the Texas Wildlife Association program is um, so important, because it is a way for people to get access. But even then, we might have like 150 slots and we got 600 people
Mm.
who apply to learn to hunt. So I would say that probably the first place to start is to look at local government, look at your state government, see what kind of conservation organizations they might have under their purview, and really, honestly, also like social media. I think social media is a great place to follow both accounts of outdoors people, that may like run a hunt here and there, or like ladies groups. There's a lot of like women of the wild, she hunts. There's a lot of more um like a lot smaller, what I would call like outfitters or educational groups
Mhm.
that are looking in each state to kind of mentor people. And most of their presence is going to be on social media, Instagram, Facebook, things like that. It's also kind of tricky because they get censored a lot.
Mm.
They get shadow banned because hunting content is seen as graphic and violence. Knock on wood, that hasn't happened to me yet. I try to be very, and even the most respectful hunters that I see, they still will get censored, videos taken down, things like that. Even ones with like educational bents, which is a whole nother conversation. Like,
Mm. Yeah.
why are we censoring this kind of education? Like, you can show a steak, but you can't show the dead cow that steak comes from.
Right. It's again that
So
disconnection, right? It's almost not to say it's
yeah,
intentional, but it's sort of built into the process. I mean, it is built into the process.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
you said, there are very few markets. Like I've never even heard of a market like the one you described, where you're there and you're present for the process. Probably because that's not the best business model in the world. A lot of people are probably just like, "Can you just do that in the back?"
Yeah.
But
Yeah, but
I
then,
get it. I totally
like,
get it.
yeah, yeah, it's again, it like goes back to like that disconnection, right?
Mhm.
It goes back to that we always want to see it in the back, but you know what? There's some dude in the back that's doing this work for you.
Right.
You know, meat plant workers have a high rate of suicide.
Oh, geez.
Slaughtermen do,
I did not know that, but I believe that.
you know? And I don't know like the statistics, but it is a high rate of suicide. Well, yeah, you're killing, 10,000 heads of cattle a day. That's got to take a toll on someone. I'm a hunter, and I'm hunting, 2 or 3 animals a year, and it takes a toll on me emotionally. I can't imagine having to do that with nameless animals day in and day out, right? So, again, like this idea that we can just send everything to the back and forget that it exists and be unwilling to face that uncomfortableness, I think is the reason that a lot of that like we find ourselves where we are now,
Mm.
right? If we're unwilling to be uncomfortable, we're unwilling to look at the reality of what we're living, right? Because yeah, sure, you can be like, okay, well, I don't want to see that lamb get slaughtered. Of course, yeah, who does,
Mhm.
right? But you want to eat that lamb?
Yes, yes. I have a psychological impact of slaughterhouse employment, a systematic review. This is on the National Library of Medicine. It says 14 studies met this conclusion. The findings were that one, the prevalence of mental health disorders, two, types of coping mechanisms, and three, the link between slaughterhouse employment and crime perpetration. It was found that slaughterhouse workers have a higher prevalence of mental health issues, in particular depression and anxiety. In addition to violence, supportive attitudes. Workers employ a variety of both adaptive and maladaptive strategies to cope with the workplace environment. Finally, there's some evidence that slaughterhouse work is associated with increased crime. Research reviewed this shown a link between slaughterhouse work and antisocial behavior generally and sexual offending specifically. Interesting. Huh. It makes sense. I mean, that's a tough job. And
It's a tough job.
I think you were saying to get into the hunting world, what you would recommend is try to get some sort of a training. And I do agree with you what you were saying that it is difficult because
Hmm.
I would say my access to it has only and exclusively been through like people I know being like, "Would you like to go on a
Hmm.
hunt?" Maybe I bring it up like, "Oh, you're a
Yeah.
hunter? Like, where do you hunt?" Where like I'm kind of like, "You take me with you." Um, but yeah, I don't really see a lot of like open promotion of like, let's teach people to hunt. There's plenty of like, let's teach people to do jujitsu. Let's teach people to do boxing. But there's
Yeah.
not a lot of like,
Yeah.
let's teach people to hunt kind of things out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, maybe part of that is like the first challenge, right? Like maybe that's part of it is like the first challenge is, okay, well, I know that I want to start hunting. Well, how do I do this? I think that sometimes we live such convenient, comfortable lives that we expect to just be able to reach out and be like, oh, that's where my hunting knowledge is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it does require a little bit of work and asking,
Mm-hmm.
and really allowing yourself to be uncomfortable and ask for what it is you want. If you do overhear somebody saying, "Oh, I'm going hunting this weekend," there's your first challenge, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's your first thing to overcome is to go and ask for help. I think that's the other aspect of it. Not to say that like it wouldn't be great if there was just a one-stop shop or like a certain resource for it, because that doesn't exist. Um, so really my big advice is to like get yourself on social media. If you're a woman hunter, literally just type in hunting women, the state that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
Inevitably, you will come across social media accounts, Facebook accounts, Twitter, threads, like anywhere, websites, things like that of people just wanting. There's a lot of education out there, but it does require folks to go and really truly seek it out, right? Like go hunt your education first.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the other thing is to put yourself in social situations. Go hike, go out in the outdoors. Really, like if you want to learn how to hunt first, let's like just go spend some time in nature,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, Oftentimes there's like we in Texas we have a group called Stewards of the Wild that are geared towards young urban professionals who are sort of interested in hunting. They start them out with like happy hours, so just like look for like social engagements like that. Just go hang out with a bunch of people. Opportunities will arise, but it is a matter of like putting yourself out there and really like not just signing up for a class, but going to seek a community.
Mm. And what was the first animal that you hunted, and how did you decide on that?
Oh, so the first animal I hunted was an Aoudad. And an Aoudad
Oh, what?
is
Hold on a minute. Can you spell that?
yes, Aoudad.
Aoud.
Hmm.
Aoudad. A Barbary sheep. It looks wow.
Yes.
Whoa, this was the first thing you hunted?
Yeah,
For
yeah,
those just listening, it looks kind of like it's like a mountain goat, but it's got some very big horns. I mean, these horns
yes,
have to be like, 16
they're beautiful.
inches. Yeah, each one
Yeah,
of them. So maybe like 2 or almost 3 feet across. Maybe not 3 feet,
yeah,
but like 2 feet across from horn to horn. Wow. Yeah, beautiful
yeah,
animal. Very interesting.
beautiful.
How did you
So
decide on
Aoudad,
this? Yeah.
I, well, opportunity, really. So, okay, please, my life mantra is fuck around and find out.
Yep.
That's just like how I approach really anything in life. Um, and saying yes to opportunity, right? And so I had decided that I wanted to go hunting. And I didn't, again, I struggled with access to it. It's like, oh, who do I talk to? I need friends who maybe they had leases or, they hunted on their property, but nothing really concrete. And then a friend of mine came up to me one day and said, hey, do you want to go hunt Aoudad? And it's like, I didn't even hesitate. I said yes, because I was like, if I hesitate, I'm going to like find a reason to not do it. So
Right.
I'm just going to say yes. And definitely terrified from the moment that I said yes. I was like, oh shit, now I gotta like go look and learn and practice and figure out how the hell I'm gonna bring myself to kill an animal.
What a crazy
Um,
looking animal. I'm just still scrolling through pictures. For anybody out there, I
yeah, so
suggest you look up some Aoudads. But those are
yeah,
big animals. And am I correct in saying
hmm
that often animals like this, like kind of your mountain goat esque, are quite difficult to hunt? They're not going to just be like
yes,
roaming around in your backyard. Sometimes, like you would see maybe a deer just like kind of pop into your backyard, and you're like, oh shoot, there it is.
yeah. No, you definitely don't see them often. They were brought over. They have a bad reputation for being quote unquote trash meat in the wild game world, as
Okay.
is they're not considered tasty. They're considered smelly. They're just considered kind of a nuisance because they do reproduce a lot. They are an invasive species here.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm someone who like I love a good underdog, So it's like, oh, no one wants to shoot Aoudads. That's what I wanna. I want to hunt an Aoudad and I want to turn it into delicious food
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
this idea of something being trash meat or inedible just makes no sense to me. Um,
Check this
and so
out.
that
Hold
was
on one second. Check this out. I was sorry. I apologize. I'm still
that's
scrolling.
okay.
Check out what I just found. Well, who's this right
What's that?
here?
Oh, look at
Yep, you're
that.
on Google.
I'm on Google.
Yep. I was like, wait a minute, is that
That's
her? And
my
I was like, I
Aoudad.
recognize that tattoo right there. Yep. Here's a picture of Chris right here with her Aoudad. Sure enough.
Yep,
Sorry.
that's my Aoudad.
Sorry to interrupt
That's
you there.
okay.
Yeah.
No, 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 that's great. Yeah. So you Google see my Aoudad. Yeah, so there was okay, so Aoudad were, derided animals, and so that of course made them very appealing to me. The people that I was gonna go hunt with were good friends of mine. They were all women.
Hmm.
That's another part of the conversation that the female hunter demographic is definitely growing. And even though they don't get as much of a spotlight as like meat eater or things like that, once you enter the hunting world, it is really quite surprising to see how many proficient female hunters are out there
Hmm.
providing, food for their families. And so three of those such ladies, I went on a hunt with them and we were going to do herd management. So a lot of my hunting experiences has been that it's going to manage overpopulation of herd. And these particular Aoudad had really overpopulated a smaller, I think it's a 4 or 500 acre ranch, which sounds like a lot in Texas. It's one of the smaller ranches
Yeah.
when we're talking about game ranches. And it was the Aoudad were encroaching upon the other wildlife's habitat, right?
Hmm.
So it was a matter of they really needed to be controlled in order to allow the other wildlife to flourish. So that is also a thought that goes behind hunting. It isn't just reckless, mindless killing. It is these particular, this wildlife is impacting this other wildlife. help again restore balance since we are really the only predators around. Um, and so this all these Aoudad had really just taken over this ranch and they needed help. And we went out there and it was the first time I had ever really sat in a blind. And it was high up. It was a high up. So I had to climb these like rickety old stairs and I'm scared of heights.
Mm.
So it's like, but I love challenge, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I love challenge. I love the feeling when you do something you thought you couldn't do, you know? And even when you fail, it's like, oh, maybe I can do it a little different the next time, right? So it was that, like, was carrying a rifle, which is awkward and bulky and something I'd never done before. And then I'm like carrying it up these rickety old stairs to sit in this tiny little box with these two other people to kill something, right? It was just like a very intense experience all the way around. But we got there before the sun came up, and so I got to see the sunrise. And that feeling of watching the world come to life and like the sequence that happens, you know, how the sun starts peeking out a little bit and then the birds start and everything else starts moving, um, was just beautiful and spiritual. And already I felt starting to feel like a little bit more plugged in, you know. And then you have the Aoudad, which they are. They love hills, mountains, you know, and they're coming down from the hills in the morning. And, you know, just to see these like majestic creatures just all wake up and move together and was really just really beautiful. And I felt so grateful. The depth of gratitude that I feel on every hunt always surprises me. I always feel like, wow, I can't believe I get to like be here and, you know, experience this and be an observer of it. And uh, so I got there and I had a couple of shots, you know, but none that I took. I didn't quite still know at that time whether or not I could kill an animal, but I had already told myself that it was okay to not. And that's something that I tell a lot of new hunters is to not go into a situation thinking that the only goal or the only thing that matters is that you kill an animal. The journey of it is just as important. You know, again, something that I translate to other areas of my life. You know, it's like, yes, you have an end goal, but that's not all of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so much to learn along the journey. So I decided that it was okay if I wasn't going to take the shot. And then I had a good shot, and I took it, and the safety on my rifle was on. So nothing happened. But what that did was that gave me confidence to know that if it came down to it, I could and would pull the trigger,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that I think cleared up a lot of my nerves from doing it. And when my Aoudad came out, the one in the photo, she was kind of separate from everyone. I had been watching for a while, and the sun was starting to come up, and she had her head to the sun. And I couldn't think of like a more poetic moment. And it's either now or never.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one of the things that about Aoudad is that they are very hardy animals, and that's why they're hard to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
They're big, they're tough, um, and if you don't get them just right, they will run off into the brush, you know, with thorns and mesquite and cacti, and you don't want to go look for them. It's going to be really hard to then retrieve them.
Mm-hmm.
So it was important to always important to take the very best shot that delivers the most humane death. And I was fortunate enough that my first hunt, that's exactly what happened. I took the shot, and it was a double long shot, a double lung shot, and
Mm-hmm.
she dropped. And I always say that I took her breath away, she took my breath away, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, and and I was forever changed by that, just like that one moment in time of when I pulled the trigger and I saw her drop and all the emotions started sort of flooding. Um, but the biggest one for me was how plugged into the human experience I felt.
Mm-hmm.
How much that for me, it filled me with purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I was incredibly sad for the animal for this life I had taken, right? This idea that you you're responsible for the death of an animal is a hard for one for me to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
I don't kill spiders, you know. I don't.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I
Yeah,
definitely.
I try to get them
Yeah.
outside if I can.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, oh, man, they do more work than I ever will, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but again, like I said previous, it's this overwhelming sense too of gratitude and accomplishment and empowerment,
Mm.
right? It's very empowering to to take to hunt an animal, to skin it, to gut it, to butcher it. It's not just a life skill. It's not just the food. It's a journey of self, I think.
Mm.
You know, you are constantly overcoming something that, especially you're a first-time hunter, that you've never encountered before. You know, you're allowing yourself to navigate this whole new experience, and you're always confronted with the fact that this was a life that you took and that now you're responsible for it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I tell my students when I teach my butchery clinics or at hunt camps, I tell them to give themselves the gift of that labor, right? A lot of times, I'll get asked, oh, well, how quickly can you work through a carcass? And for me, that's not the point,
Mm.
right? It's like an animal is going to take however that long that specific animal takes, depending on, you know, multitude of variables. And to take that time, you know, I take my time with these animals. I really want to honor them through the work that I'm doing. And so I tell hunters to do that same, right? We think about hunting, and especially in a hunting culture, there's a lot of work that leads up to the hunt. You know, you learn, you get your rifle, you get the right ammo, you get the right camo, you get the right gear, you get everything set up, you practice at the range, you do all that, and you kill an animal, and then education and experience drops off because typically you're probably taking it to a commercial processor.
Mm-hmm.
You won't see that animal until it's food on your plate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I invite hunters to take that further and see that all that work that they did to lead up to that hunt, the work continues after it.
Mm-hmm.
And that work that you do after, you know, if you took the care to get the right rifle, you took the care to get the right kind of ammo, you took the care to make sure that you gave that animal a humane death because you want to honor the life of that animal. The butchery aspect is also honoring the life of the animal, much like, you know, taxidermy work is about preserving and honoring the life of that animal. Butchery is the same way.
Mm.
So the butchery of an animal should not be rushed. And again, even though, you know, I'm a commercial processor, this is what I do for my day job. It's like I think that every hunter should know and should have that experience. That experience is paramount. And that education gap in hunting is quite a big one. There's not a whole lot of butchery education, which is sort of the gap that I'm trying to fill in with, you know, clinics or my social media or like my brand or hunt camps, things like that, because I truly want to invite people to see that they can do the hard work, that they can do that labor, you know, that they don't, that it's okay to be uncomfortable, you know, that it's okay. You just like work through it and figure out why it's uncomfortable and learn something about yourself and learn about your relationship to yourself, to your food, to the world around you.
Mm-hmm. And what when you talk about hunting as a life skill, also that life skill isn't really complete until you learn the butchering process.
Hmm.
Even if you're like, oh, I'm not great at it, but I can do it. Um,
Yeah.
like you know, maybe this is a silly way of thinking about it, but you kind of think like, okay, if the world went to shit and now I got to survive, it's like, do I have these skills? And if you know how to hunt, great. But if you don't know how to butcher the animal, like, or preserve it, or do all these things, it's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
good luck. Find somebody who knows how to do it, right?
Yeah.
So the $1,000,000
Yeah, it's
question
true.
is, well, I was
Yeah.
sorry, I was going to
No,
ask. So the
that's
$1,000,000
okay.
question is, what did the Aoudad end up tasting like? Were you able
Oh my God.
to do something good with it?
Yes, the Aoudad is delicious. Okay, so here's the thing about wild game is, and there's this whole new like meat eater was kind of paramount in teaching people like how to whole animal use their wild game,
Hmm.
right? So typically the majority of game that's hunted here is deer, right? Texas is different because we've got other species, but you're talking about as a whole hunting culture, they're hunting deer. And when it comes to deer, there's still this idea of like, let's get, the back straps, which are the outer loins and the tenderloins, and, just get these little like bits and pieces off, and everything's going to go into ground meat, right? So, and everything's gonna be like chicken fried, or everything's gonna be breakfast sausage. There's like these staples in wild game cuisine,
Hmm.
right? That fit fine when you're talking about deer, and but then you're talking about an animal that's like from Africa, right? An animal that's from India, an animal that's from Asia. You have all these sort of other exotic animals coming around,
Hmm.
and the flavor profiles that you would normally use with deer don't translate as well to
Interesting.
an animal that is from, a different part of the world.
I guess
So
that
what I
makes
always
sense
tell
because,
people,
like, if
yeah,
you think of Indian cuisine, if that is not similar at all to like how you would mentally, I'm thinking of like, if I cook a deer, how would I cook it? It'd be like peppery, salty, those kind of things.
right, pepper, salt, and garlic.
Right.
That's like,
Right. But those are
that's
not what you
the,
would think when you think like, oh, I have like an Indian animal. Like, and I know that a lot of animals have been brought to Texas from these other
yeah,
places that if they just flourished in Texas. Of course they do, right? Um,
yeah,
which I'm not sure where your animal was originally like native to.
yeah. I think North Africa.
Hmm. Yeah, very different style of cooking, right?
It's a very different style of thinking. So what I always tell folks is to look at the origin of the animal,
Mm.
right? So my Aoudad, it was like heavily spiced, made curries out of it, made um chorizo out of it, made all these like really heavily spiced kind of dishes instead of doing like a salt, pepper, sort of basic wild game seasoning.
Hmm.
So the fun thing about wild game and animals like Aoudads, or even, feral pigs, which are another big controversy on whether or not we should be eating them, but they are like a food. They are their groceries are free groceries. They
Mm.
need to get eaten. But again, they are these animals that have taken on this idea that they're dirty, they're gross, they're sick, they're full of parasites. Um, but like you don't really know what your beef is eating. You don't know what like your chicken's eating. You're not watching them eat. So like
Mhm.
this idea that any animal is dirtier than the other, um, is to me it's just asinine. It's like that's not how it works.
Mm.
It's like eat it. It's gonna be great. Just like know how to treat it.
Mm.
You don't cook wild game the same way you would do beef. You don't cook it the same way that you do pork. But there's nothing to say that you can't use your wild game in any sort of cuisine. One of the things that they like the Adult Learn to Hunt program, or a lot of like actually just a lot of wild game chefs in general, which if you look at social media, there's sort of a rise in wild game chefs, hunters who are starting to kind of cook outside the box, um, chefs who are looking for, other types of proteins to work with, and they're making dishes from all over the world using wild game. Um, but a lot of times it's like these wild game was the first protein that these dishes were made with,
Mhm.
right? Far before we had industrial agriculture, game was what folks ate. So I really love to see wild game kind of get elevated in a way of, it doesn't just have to be like chicken fried or ground meat. It can go into curries. It can go into like, ramen dishes. It can be like into pozole. It can go into all these other
Mm,
worldly culinary cuisines and be often, I personally think, taste even better
mm.
than a traditional pork or beef protein in these dishes.
What do you do to kind of think about, as you said, the safety of the meat? Is that something that you feel like you can see when you butcher the animal? Is it something you can tell with the health of the animal? Because I know there are, very, and I don't know it nearly probably as well as you do, but I know there are like
Mhm.
parasites and things out there that wild game and domesticated game can get, of course.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
how do you think about that?
I, okay, so when we're talking about one of the things that we had said was talking about serving wild game in restaurants and why you can't do it
Yeah.
is because of the USDA standards,
Right.
right? So like the idea that wild animals, you don't control their diet, you can't control their environment, all those things led to it. Processors, we're not held to USDA standards because we don't have control of what happens from the field to when that animal gets to our receiving dock, right?
Okay.
And that gap is why you can't serve it in restaurants. Now, in restaurants, you can serve farmed wild game. So if you go somewhere and you get venison, that venison was raised on a deer farm, just like beef, just like pork, slaughtered as such by, like USDA inspected and brought through, that you're not eating a wild animal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You're eating farmed deer, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
farmed game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so when it comes to the safety of the meat, really the only things that don't become safe when in terms of game are it's not even parasites, right? Like you should be cooking your like the parasites will normally exist in hogs, right? Let's say like hogs has parasites, hogs have all that. It's like you can cook that out.
Mm.
Heat cooks a lot of like that those parasites out, just like you would cook your pork, just like you would cook
Mm-hmm.
your beef. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to worry any more about wild game than you do about your domestic animals. In fact, I say you have to worry less because wild animals are given the freedom to eat a varied wild diet. They're not under stress
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to like animals in feedlots or animals who are receiving antibiotics or receiving growth hormones or receiving all these things that are legal
Mm-hmm.
in our food industry, but that are not necessarily good for us to consume.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, industrialized meat is far dirtier, if we're
Mm-hmm.
going to use that, than a hunted wild game. That I've been doing this for 8 years, and the amount of parasites that I have seen on any wild game is zero.
Mm.
Um, a lot of we have these things called I think probably the grossest thing you will find is something called the botfly, that lives in the nasal cavity of a deer.
Mm-hmm. I've
And
seen some videos of botfly removal
yeah,
of
yeah,
various different animals.
yeah, yeah, and like, but that doesn't affect the quality of the meat.
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't impact the quality of meat. What does impact the quality of the meat from a hunting perspective is shot placement,
Okay.
right? So if you shoot an animal towards the back end, not only will that animal suffer, right? So you'll have a lot of adrenaline running through
Mm.
its body, a lot of chemical stuff like that. And then if you're shooting it towards the back, you're most likely shooting it in the guts. So you'll have a lot of contamination from
Spillage.
intestines,
Yeah.
things like that, spillage. Um,
Hmm.
and then and then from there is like the aftercare of the animal. Like, how are you field dressing the animal? How are you caring for the animal's meat afterwards? One of the things that I always tell hunters is to keep their meat cold and dry. The introduction of water introduces bacteria,
Yeah.
things, all of those kind of tips and tricks. But I would say that as a whole, wild game meat is not the dirty meat that you're sold. It's not one that's like filled with parasites. It's not going to make you sick. It's nutrient dense, delicious meat. And I think, if we're talking like a bit of spiritual quality to it, right? Like you're eating something that's wild and free.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I like to think about that you would take a little bit of that wild and free spirit when you're eating wild game.
I like that. Yeah. But also when people talk about, the ethics, right? Don't you think that an animal who ran around wild for 10 years and then, I know this is, obviously this is where people get
Yeah.
frustrated. They had one bad day, it's right. Okay. Um, as opposed to an animal that's, industrially farmed and they may only live, 18 months, like, cause we
Yeah.
push them through the process as fast as we humanly possibly can.
Yeah.
And then we slaughter them. Like in, I had a guy on who is in the egg industry. That's an interesting one. You'd probably like that one, and you probably know a
Mm,
lot of the stuff about the egg industry, the chicken egg industry. But a lot of these animals are either in a like a tiny like a shoebox
yeah.
essentially, and they don't really get to shift around or move. Or B, if I can't remember what the term he used was. It was it's not cage free. It's cage free. Yeah, that's what it is. If they call him
Yeah.
cage free, he's like, basically what that means is you're gonna walk in and they're gonna be on like the floor of a enormous facility, and there might be 10,000 of them like butted right
Mm,
up next to each other. Like, so yes, they're not in a cage, but he's like they don't really have space to move. Um, but don't you think that a wild animal has lived a much better life than that animal? Like, is it more humane
mhm.
to eat one animal versus the other? Like, I personally think that wild animal, not only that, but this is again like our opinion, but that animal had kind of like a fair chance, right? Like you had to actually go
Yeah.
out and not like win that battle, but that animal, like if they winded you or they heard you or they saw you, they might just take off and bolt. And it's obviously very difficult to hunt that animal. So I think there's just a lot of things to think about that maybe people don't necessarily think through when they think about, domesticated animals versus wild game.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I do think that I would much rather eat an animal that has lived as wild and independent of life as, we can give it,
Hmm.
rather than contribute to a system that has no concern truly for animal welfare, because they're trying to meet a need, right? Like the need is also driven by our consumerism, our demand for meat. And sometimes I wonder if that demand would be as high if we were forced to do it ourselves, right? Like if we were presented that, hey, if you want protein, you do have to go out and get it.
Hmm.
Like you do have to go kill that animal.
Yeah.
You do have to move through that process. I don't think, animal advocates, they put out these like gory and grotesque videos, in a way to like shock people into caring and shock people into stewardship. Um, and I don't know that approach hasn't worked, right? So what about the approach of let's humanize, like we were talking about, like the slaughterhouses, right? Let's humanize the people behind the labor that we're outsourcing.
Hmm.
If we are truly trying to create a more empathetic, fair society, then we have to face a lot of the ugly things that we have done. A lot of the ways that our consumerism and our desire for being comfortable and having conveniences has upset the balance of things.
Hmm.
And what work can we do to restore that balance or, lessen our impact? I had a vegetarian I always say that I have more in common with vegetarians than I do with like commercial meat eaters,
Mhm.
because I do advocate um, for animal welfare all across the board, with wildlife and with farmed domestics. But I had a vegetarian send me an email a few months ago. And very kind, I'm always willing to like let's have these conversations. I think there's more common ground than there isn't. Um, and they did talk about, trying to lessen their impact, and that's the reason that they went, plant-based, and that we eat too much meat as a society. And, whether that's true, that's really neither here nor there, right? Like the idea that you're trying to lessen the impact um, is important. And the one thing about, again, when we talked about earlier about plant-based diets is that their impact is pretty high.
Yeah.
Like their impact, maybe it's not, I don't really know like statistics. I'm mostly in the wild game world, but I don't, their impact is pretty high. And then, but the impact that hunters are taking deer. Yes, we're out there killing deer. There's not a whole lot of hunters in the United States. There's, a good amount, but not a whole lot. Most of the United States does not hunt. Um, and, figure they're taking a few animals off the land, right? Like, what kind of impact really is that? That's not a whole hell of a lot. And then what's the benefit of that when we talk about how hunters contribute to conservation? The benefit of that is that all hunting licenses go towards conservation. The taxes that hunters pay on rifles, ammo, hunting gear, camo, everything that has to do with hunting, all those taxes go back to conservation.
Mhm.
So not only are hunters actually going out there and doing the difficult work of helping manage population, of being low impact in terms of the protein that they're consuming, right? The way that they're not participating in um, the food industry system, um, and how they're
Mhm.
fiscally helping conservation. The negative impact, right? The negative impact is that you're continuing to buy into the industrialized food systems,
Mhm.
as opposed to hunting when there is more of a balance of uh, good and bad impact that comes from your
Mhm.
participation in that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I was interested to learn that the hunting programs like the Fish and Wildlife is totally self-sustaining, basically, from what I
Hmm.
understand. Whereas that is not true of basically everything else on the federal level. All of your tax dollars are generally going to that. Like even the Postal Service is supposed to be self-sustaining, but it's lost money for something like 24 years in a row or something like that.
Yeah.
And then they do this weird thing where they get a loan from the government to like cover their losses, whatever. But basically, all wild game and hunting and fishing is covered by the hunters. So that system does not cost the consumers anything in the United States, does not cost the taxpayers anything. It's all covered by the people that are involved in it, which would, I think it would be great if that was more true of other programs in the United States, but neither here nor there.
Yeah, agreed.
So I know we're kind of
Agreed.
getting to the end here, but kind of one last question when it comes to wild
Sure.
game. Why do you think that people do think that it is so strange to eat wild game? And then maybe just tell me about your kind of favorite things, or maybe some of the most rewarding things that you've had the opportunity to engage in and eat and butcher and hunt, and how that's something that you continue to take with you.
Sure. Wait, what was the first part of the question?
Why do you think people think it's so strange to eat wild game?
Oh, I mean, yeah. Okay. Well, because people don't know. I think like with anything, right? Like it's again, it harkens back to how disconnected we are from where we get our food. I actually a few years ago I took an axis deer, which is an invasive species of deer. You really can only find in Texas and Maui and in India. But I took a deer up to Chicago and to Logan Square, a very urban, middle of the city neighborhood,
Hmm.
and we did a butchery dinner. and I did a butchery demo, and then we ate the animal
Okay.
with the intent to invite people to have this experience that they would not normally get to. You know, this is full of non-hunters,
Yep.
right? But all meat eaters. Um, and so I think exposures like that will help in terms of rewriting that narrative
Mhm.
of that eating wild game or that hunting is kind of a weird thing to do. It's, I mean, I had that, right? Like when I showed up, it was like for me, hunting, I didn't even know that game processing, like wild game butchers, were even a thing.
Mhm.
You know, for me, it was something that folks did in their backyard, backwoods, you know, lower income, all these,
Hillbillies,
or
say it.
yeah,
Hillbillies, rednecks.
well, like
Yeah.
just you know, I got my redneck cred real quick though. I'll
Yeah.
say that,
Yeah.
you know, but like, or or it was unethical trophy hunting in Africa, right? Like, but there's all this stuff in the middle, and so that lack of exposure, I think, really is a detriment. So a lot of my purpose is to be a resource, be a point of access for people
Mhm.
to see wild game presented uh, in a way that is genuine and true to hunting culture.
Mhm.
Um, that helps highlight highlight the benefits of it, right? Highlights the beauty of wild game, highlight the beauty of being so connected to nature, right? That you're granted these gifts of these animals that you can turn into food.
Mhm.
It's let's reframe what the consumption of wild game looks like, and let's show who the people are that are going out there and getting and eating wild game and cooking wild game. I mean, you have like these just like incredible chefs that are dedicated to wild game. You know, I
Mhm.
have a friend, Kristen Parma. She makes Thai cuisine, you know, Mexican cuisine. She made for me Chicago dogs, like a traditional Chicago hot dog
Mhm.
out of wild boar.
Mm.
Right. So the idea that wild game is dirty and like hunting is barbaric, it's just a lack of exposure to that world.
Yeah.
And I think that is just the crux of everything,
Mhm.
right? Like, why can't I get along with my neighbor? Well, his life experience is different. His world perspective is different, right? Like, his narrative is different. So if you allow yourself to be open to not knowing, right? And to wanting that exposure, I think that that helps the narrative along. And so my purpose is on one end to make, I always say like to make meat dreams come true for hunters.
Mm.
Um, but really it's to invite people to what, to invite people to help them reframe what hunting is, who hunters are, what conservation looks like, what stewardship looks like, just all these things that really lead down to connection. If you can't get connect to something, you can't understand it.
Mm.
So I want to be like a connection point for people who do think that wild game is dirty or that hunting is barbaric. It's like, well, let me show you like my perspective
Mhm.
on that world.
Mhm.
Um,
And then let people kind of
so
decide for themselves. Once you're exposed and you
yeah,
get there and you understand all of it, it's like, hey, now you get to make a decision, but you're making a decision
yeah.
from a place of information, not from ignorance.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, that's one of the the great things about these like adult learn to hunt programs, or any learn to hunt program is that it does allow people from all walks of life, right? So, all people are from all walks of life are descending upon this place to go through the same transformative experience. And the commonality is that they want connection to their meat. They want connection to their food. And food is the ultimate connector. It's if we can get folks from all walks of life to enter this space where they're all have that same one common interest of I want to be more connected. And it doesn't matter if it's like they want to be more connected to nature, they want to be more connected to their food. What's important is that they want to be more connected.
Mm-hmm.
And nature, and for me, hunting specifically, allows for that to happen, for them to connect to, to their goals, to nature, to hunting, for them to connect to themselves, and for them to connect to each other. And that's really, I think, what hunting provides for people, this opportunity to connect. And the more people that we have from all different walks of life who are curious and want to fuck around and find out, the more I think that we will start to connect with people who are not normally like-minded like us, but at the very core, right? We all are seeking connection and understanding and to be heard. And I think that like the outdoors and hunting do offer that to people beyond like the practical life skill of
Mm-hmm.
like harvesting, butchering, eating your own meat. It's like there's all these other underlying benefits that I think really truly bring out the best in people. Um, I was recently on a hunt with a new hunter who had never shot a rifle before, and she didn't even know if she wanted to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't know. She was just there curious, right? Let me have this experience in a safe environment. And by the end of the weekend, she had hunted her first animal. Uh, and she had cried about it. And it's like, yeah, of course, it's tough. And then the next weeks showed her like sending me texts of food that she had made
Mm.
and like how it had connected, how the cuisine she was making connected her to her grandmother,
Mm.
to her family. There was like so much more beyond that moment. And so that for me is a gift, a gift that people can give themselves. Whatever hard thing that you think you can't do, just, go out and do it and see what happens.
I love it. Well,
Yeah.
Chris, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
think that you're very convincing with your words about at least just get out there and experience some things for yourself. Figure out if it is for you or if it's not. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
where can people catch up with you and find some of the stuff that you do, or maybe potentially get some help with some of the things that they want to learn if they're in your greater area?
Yeah, sure. So, you can find me at meetyourmeat.net. That's my website, and I'll, post stuff on there. Probably the best way is to hit me up on Instagram, which is Chris dash under Abigail. Yeah, Chris. No, it's not dash. Sorry,
We'll link it.
I
Don't
don't even know
worry.
what.
Don't worry.
You'll link it. Thank you.
Yeah, you
You
can't
you
can't
took
do
care
it
of that
wrong.
part.
Yeah.
But I really am open to being a resource for people, whether in Texas or not. If you are looking to hunt, I do have connections in other parts of the country of, organizations. So, I know I said go and research yourself, but feel free to, reach out and I can connect you with folks. I'll hold butchery classes. I'll do hunt camps. So there's a lot of sort of avenues to learn from me or get connected with people that you can learn from. Uh,
Awesome.
that's it, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Chris. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Talk soon.
Alrighty.